So we're back. It's Sunday. I know we're usually gonna start our series No Shop Sunday, but we didn't stream all week, so we're gonna be doing some shop today. We're kind of not doing something directly related to climate. We're gonna, as you guys know, I love talking about China and I love talking about like world politics. So we're gonna be talking about the potential for World War III and what World War III would look like. So yeah, that's what we're gonna be talking about today. Gordian, got anything to say?
No, not really. Also, side note, may not be here the whole time, but I could possibly be getting replaced by somebody else.
Yes,
who shall be arriving.
We have a special.
Our first on-stream guest, other than
we got a special guest. It's not like an expert or anything, but it's somebody who you guys know, who knows a lot about world politics, and who I have talked a lot about world politics with. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the deal. All right, so I was looking at this article earlier, and this looks like that it's a article about like different ways that World War III might start, and ways that like different areas where World War III could start. And like this came out in February 2023, so it's pretty recent. So the main ways they see it are conflicts in Russia, which I'm sure you guys know about, conflicts in Iran, which we can talk about that. I feel like that one's like the lesser likely one, and then I think the Russia one is obviously
it's happening, so
the most likely because it's happening. But I'm not sure if that would send the world into World War III at this point. But a Chinese attack on Taiwan would be disastrous. And if you don't know much about China and Taiwan, we can definitely get into it. But and all of these are interconnected. Like
true sass.
What's that say?
He said war never changes.
Yep. So I think that if there was potentially a World War III, the sides would be China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea versus the West, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and spoiler alert, I got the West in 6.
Maybe 5.
What's that stat you always like about like how long?
I remember watching. It was a It's a great YouTube video that everybody should watch, but it's how long could the United States hold off literally the entire world in just like a siege warfare, essentially. And it was like they could last for, I'm pretty sure, like 11 years against every single nation on the planet. So,
well, I'd hope so with how much.
I know.
I mean, I'm sure everybody here knows how much they invest in.
Exponentially more than anybody else.
Let's shuffle this playlist here. You know what? No fucking way. Oop, I'm not, shouldn't be swearing.
You only queued up a couple songs.
No, I want to shuffle this playlist.
Yeah, so hit play and then
here we go. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, Gordian, would you do the honors here?
Which part would you like me to read?
Let's just go through it.
So we already read that first part. So 40 million people, both civilians and military, died in the First World War. World War II caused about 60 million casualties, an additional 20 to 30 million deaths from war-related disease and famine. That's crazy. World War III would likely be deadlier because the world has only become more advanced and destructive, and obviously higher population. With the world already in a precarious state, one wrong move could be the spark that ignites the powder keg. This is why it is more important than ever for the international community to work together to prevent the outbreak of World War III. This is why it's more important than ever to have leaders who understand the relevant issues and can be calm in a violent storm.
Well,
Don't disagree with any of that.
This is one of the reasons why people apparently were so worried about Trump being president.
Yeah.
And it's because he is obviously reckless and everything. But one of the books I've brought up that I talked about specifically focusing on Trump and China is a book called something like Fire Under Heaven or like something like that. It's about by this guy Josh Rogan, who he goes into like Trump's like advisors on China, and there are definitely people in Trump's cabinet who are saying like, we must destroy the CCP at all costs, and then there was people like, we gotta. In Obama, when Obama wasn't in office, he was much more took a cooperative tone with China. It was like, we need to be partners, not adversaries. And Trump totally went the other way. And Biden actually surprisingly has continued the Trump tactics in his first State of the Union, which must have been in 2021. He was like, we will not let China like become the dominant power in the world, and we will preserve American hegemony. And it's like ridiculous. Like and especially something we'll go into is that not only could it cause World War III in terms of like destructive nuclear war and whatever, but also they need to work together on climate issues. And we're not going to be focusing that much on climate issues today, but all of it is interconnected. But let's continue.
I don't think we needed to really describe what a world war is.
Yeah, okay, here we go. What would happen if World War?
In the event of World War III, what would World War III look like? The global landscape would undergo drastic and irreversible changes. Makes sense. Conflict could potentially be sparked by several flashpoints, such as the continued invasion of UK. Yeah. Each of these scenarios involves powerful nations with significant military capabilities, making the potential for a global conflict very real. The repercussions of such war would be catastrophic.
In chat, can you hear me well over the music? Somebody in chat, let me know if you can hear me.
Should be fine.
Yeah, somebody needs to let me know if they can hear me over the music, but we'll keep going.
Oh, I don't think I actually.
Was music not playing?
Now it is.
Now it is? Alright, so good.
Alright, let me make sure. Yeah, we should be, yeah, because I mean, if you look at the disparity between our voices,
yeah,
it's totally fine. Alright,
Alright, let's keep going with this article. I like this.
Widespread destruction and loss of life would be inevitable if World War III happened because modern warfare capabilities far exceed those of World War I and II. If World War III were to happen, the world's economy would likely collapse under the strain of sustained conflict, leading to a global recession or even a depression. Political structures would be upended, with alliances shifting and new powers potentially emerging. Societal norms would also be disrupted as the world grapples with the aftermath of widespread destruction and loss. It's crucial to understand that World War III is not a scenario anyone should wish for, as the cost of such a conflict would be immeasurable. Focus should be on diplomatic efforts to resolve conflicts and maintain peace. Totally, completely agree.
Alright, so now I think they're going to get into each of the three main points where they identified the three biggest and most dangerous ways World War III might happen. So let's go.
Americans should continue to care about Russia, Ukraine, and Putin because they have the potential to impact our economy, our security, and our futures to drop in the candy. The unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces under the direction of Russian President Vladimir Putin is a complex geopolitical issue that has far-reaching consequences and can turn into World War III. Russia invaded Ukraine because Putin miscalculated the resolve of Ukrainian forces and the willingness of NATO allies to aid their friend in Eastern Europe. After Russia lost the Cold War, Putin has made it his mission to reestablish the territorial integrity of the Russian Empire that existed before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Any comment on that?
Nope, we'll keep going.
All right. It's more than just a bilateral conflict. The Russians are conducting global disinformation campaigns, including claiming the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah, that we were talking about that, and if we don't, honestly, let's bookmark this. We're gonna go to YouTube, and just so we have that online. But I wanna so let's get this in the queue. So we should watch a video. We'll watch this one after we're done. But yep.
It says the Russians have pulled out of the START III bilateral arms control treaty, which was designed to help prevent World War III. To further encircle Ukraine, they are attempting to destabilize Moldova to the south, a neighbor to NATO member Romania. The government of China is providing non-lethal military assistance and economic support to the Russian invasion.
Non-lethal military assistance. Yeah, all right.
Interesting. With indications they might supply military equipment. The country of Belarus has been used as a staging point for Russian forces. The Iranian government is supplying deadly low-cost drones for Russian use in Ukrainian territory. And North Korea is supplying Putin with rockets and artillery shells.
Jeez, I guess I did not know it was that expensive.
They're all just...
Yeah, so, okay.
At the UN General Assembly in March 2022, a resolution deploring Russia's invasion of Ukraine came up for a vote. 141 countries voted in favor of it, 5 countries voted against it, and 47 countries abstained. Cowards. About 37 countries have imposed economic sanctions on the Russian economy. Many of the 27 members of the EU have provided military support along with the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Norway. But no other country has significant troops on the ground engaging in hostilities because nobody wants this conflict turning into World War III. Makes sense?
Yep.
The death toll because Russia invaded Ukraine. That's crazy. Well, it's very difficult to get reliable figures on how many people have died in Ukraine. reports from various governments and international organizations suggest the total number of Russian casualties are between 140 and 270,000.
Jeez.
Wow.
That's a lot, dude.
The Norwegian military estimated in late January 23.
We can shut off Spotify for a second.
All right. Additionally, the UN estimates that from the start of the invasion until the middle of December 2022, more than 18 million people in Ukraine needed humanitarian aid, almost 8 million have fled the country, and 6.5 million are internally displaced.
Mm-hmm.
In January 2023, UNICEF said 11 months of war in Ukraine have disrupted education for more than 5 million boys and girls.
I mean, there's so many facets that just, like, I think people aren't realizing, like, education, getting displaced, like, and then besides just the pure death toll and
everything grinds to a halt.
Yeah. And I always think about, like, do you think there's any, like, war-aged males who are not fighting? Or, like, is it literally everybody? Because, like...
I don't know. I guess it depends on, that's like, when it's that dire of a situation, do they even care about, like, the... Because, I mean, like, here, it's like, you wouldn't have to serve if you had, like, small medical issues, or there's a lot of things that can disqualify you, and it's like, is that same thing happening there?
Yeah.
But who knows?
All right, chat. Let's get some engagement here. We need some chat here.
What would World War III look like in Ukraine? World War III would be started by 2 Russian actions that would likely prompt the United States and Europe to go from just providing military aid to Ukraine to executing their own military actions against Russia. Use of a nuclear weapon or an attack of a NATO country.
And Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons on Ukraine. Like, he knows that will cause World War III, so it's pretty obvious that would cause World War III. So I doubt he does that, but that would be bad.
That would be about as bad as it could be.
Our life is over.
Escalate to de-escalate, a flawed Russian military doctrine. Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons throughout his invasion of Ukraine. He has primarily used this threat as an attempt to scare Western governments to limit their support to Ukraine for fear of escalation. I don't think we need a definition of what escalation means, but the Russians have a military doctrine described as escalate to de-escalate. This strategy posits that by using a tactical nuclear weapon early in a conflict, Russia can intimidate their opponent into backing down, thus de-escalating the situation and preventing a global conflict like World War III. To be honest, don't think that would work.
Yeah. Let's read the tactical nuclear.
Yeah, a tactical nuclear weapon is a type of nuclear weapon that is designed to be used on the battlefield as opposed to a strategic nuclear weapon, which is designed for long-range strikes against major targets such as cities or military bases. A tactical nuke tends to be smaller in size and yield and designed to be more portable. Well, escalate to de-escalate is risky. It shows that Russia has thought through using nuclear forces to achieve their strategic goals. Almost every war game the United States has conducted testing this theory has not led to de-escalation, but escalation. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, these war games led to World War III and nuclear Armageddon.
Oh, God.
Lovely.
This is
a grim topic.
Yes.
And, I mean, obviously...
It has to be discussed.
It has to be discussed. But obviously this stuff is, I would say, a good deal more likely not to happen, but it is obviously good to discuss. The United States, European Union, and NATO have all strongly condemned any potential use of nuclear weapons by Russia. They have all stated that any use of nuclear weapons by Russia would be met with a strong response. In particular, the United States and NATO have made it clear that they would be willing to use their own nuclear weapons in response to any nuclear attack by Russia.
Right.
Dude, I'm leaving, going to the moon. An invocation of Article 5.
I don't know what this is.
I don't either.
Oh, it's just the one that if somebody attacks a NATO country, then
okay.
But let's read this.
Yeah. In April 2022, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explained how the Russian government viewed NATO support to Ukraine. NATO is essentially going to war with Russia through a proxy and arming that proxy. His deputy went even further by saying Russia would consider U.S. and NATO vehicles transporting weapons on Ukrainian territory as legitimate military targets.
I mean, I agree.
And Gil says, can we talk about how this is on Will Hurd's campaign website? It says
Who's
good
that?
article, though. I'm not sure who Will Hurd is.
Who's Will Hurd, Gil?
Yeah, who is this guy? But this is a good article, though. It's very informative. Putin knows that the war in Ukraine is not going how he planned it, with Russian planes getting shot down over Ukraine and Russian soldiers being killed in the ground war. Putin knows his military forces are in such a weakened state that he is unlikely to win a multi-front war against countries with superior armed forces that are bound together through Article 5. Article 5 is the provision in NATO's founding treaty that states that an attack on one member country is considered an attack on all members. So if Russia were to invade or attack a NATO country, the other members would be obligated to come to that country's defense. That's big. Throughout the Cold War between the West and Russia, Article 5 has been a key part of NATO's collective defense strategy. It has deferred potential aggression on NATO territory, making it clear that any attack on one member will be met with a unified response from the entire alliance. He also says congressman from Texas running for president as a Republican.
Oh, God.
He says polling at like sub 1%.
Well, he's got a great article here.
I was going to say, the risk of nuclear war is greater today than at any other time since the Cuban Missile Crisis almost turned the Cold War into a hot war. That's good. The longer the...
We should take a look at a Cuban Missile Crisis video, too. We should pull that up.
Yeah, we should. The longer the Russia-Ukraine war goes on, the greater chance this conflict could metastasize into World War III. To prevent World War III, the United States and our allies need to do everything to help Ukraine win this conflict as soon as possible, including providing aircraft. And okay, that's a bit...
Yeah, it's a bit questionable. But before we get into Iran, Israel, let's pull up a Cuban Missile Crisis video.
I'm sure this is a very short, like, concise video.
Do you want to take a break from the article and watch one real quick? Or?
Yeah. Try to find a... I'm sure there's like a short infographics one.
Yo.
Oh, yeah. That one. There you go.
This one?
Yeah. It's by Ted Ed. Let me make sure it's... No, we need the browser audio, so...
One you know could be wiped out without warning at the push of a button. This was the reality for millions of people during the 45-year period after World War II, now known as the Cold War. As the United States and Soviet Union faced off across the globe, each knew that the other had nuclear weapons capable of destroying it. And destruction never loomed closer than during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1961, the U.S. unsuccessfully tried to overthrow Cuba's new communist government. That failed attempt was known as the Bay of Pigs, and it convinced Cuba to seek help from the USSR. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was happy to comply by secretly deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba, not only to protect the island, but to counteract the threat from U.S. missiles in Italy and Turkey. By the time U.S. intelligence discovered the plan, the materials to create the missiles were already in place. At an emergency meeting on October 16, 1962, military advisors urged an airstrike on missile sites and invasion of the island. But President John F. Kennedy chose a more careful approach. On October 22nd, he announced that the U.S. Navy would intercept all shipments to Cuba. There was just one problem. A naval blockade was considered an act of war. Although the president called it a quarantine that did not block basic necessities, the Soviets didn't appreciate the distinction. In an outraged letter to Kennedy, Khrushchev wrote, "The violation of freedom to use international waters and international airspace is an act of aggression which pushes mankind toward the abyss of world nuclear missile war." Thus ensued the most intense 6 days of the Cold War. While the U.S. demanded the removal of the missiles, Cuba and the USSR...
Like, this is an example. Like, if Trump was president during this, we'd all be finished. Like, and I think they might get into it, but as they said a little bit, I think a lot of JFK's advisors were advising him to take far more extensive action.
I'm sure they were.
And like they just said, he kind of took a more measured approach, and it ultimately worked out because we're still here. So
this is a time period I've like watched a lot about, but I feel like there's probably like really good books that go deep into this that I feel would probably be a very interesting read, because I can't imagine how stressful of a time this must have been.
My dad, I don't know if I've talked about it before, but he loves he doesn't love him necessarily as a president, but this book about Lyndon B. Johnson, about how like good of a politician he was, just in terms of like his political savviness, but it goes into like all of his vice presidency, and he was obviously JFK's vice president.
Yeah.
And they talk a lot about how stressed everybody was during this, and for good reason.
I gotta read something like that.
We'll continue going here.
Insisted they were only defensive. And as the weapons continued to be armed, the U.S. prepared for a possible invasion. On October 27th, a spy plane piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down by a Soviet missile. The same day, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine was hit by a small depth charge from a U.S. Navy vessel trying to signal it to come up. The commanders on the sub, too deep to communicate with the surface, thought war had begun and prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. That decision had to be made unanimously by 3 officers. The captain and political officer both authorized the launch, but Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, refused. His decision saved the day, and perhaps the world. But the crisis wasn't over. For the first time in history, the U.S.
Like
military
5 on
selected
COD
its
Zombies.
own 2. The defense readiness one step away from nuclear war. With hundreds of nuclear missiles ready to launch, the metaphorical doomsday clock.
Like, what is the point? A nuclear war makes no sense. 'Cause
It makes no sense
If
at
it
all.
happens, the world is over. Like, what?
Yeah,
What is the point?
Yeah.
It makes 0 sense.
It's stupid. It's like it's
It
brain
makes
it's
no
brain dead.
sense.
War in general is just a brain dead maneuver.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
You know, obviously barring like
I mean,
I guess,
and
like-
they call the period after World War II, or like specifically after the Cold War, the end of history, because all of the territories like in the Reagan era, in terms of like opening up trade in the entire world, people said like, oh, there's no way there could be any more war. Like there's too many weapons. There's the economy is too open and too advanced. Like there's no way. But that's why it's so crazy, and people were so stunned about the land invasion by Putin, and that kind of just wakes people up in terms of
what a
like
crazy day that was.
that. And I remember in the lead up to it, like people were like, I thought there was no way that they were going to invade, and then they just did. But let's finish this up.
Stood at 1 minute to midnight. But diplomacy carried on. In Washington, D.C., Attorney General Robert Kennedy secretly met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. After intense negotiation, they reached the following proposal. The U.S. would remove their missiles from Turkey and Italy and promise to never invade Cuba in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal.
Was this
from
not
Cuba
the obvious
under UN
answer?
inspection.
Like, this seems so obvious.
Once the meeting had concluded,
Yeah,
Dobrynin
you would think.
traveled Moscow, saying time is of the essence and we shouldn't miss the chance. And at 9 a.m. the next day, a message arrived from Khrushchev announcing the Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. The crisis was now over.
Sonny has a good
Criticized
message as
at
soon
the
as
time by their
Huh?
Sonny has a good message for as soon as it's over.
Alright.
respective governments for bargaining with the enemy. Contemporary historical analysis shows great admiration for Kennedy and Khrushchev's ability to diplomatically solve the crisis. But the disturbing lesson was that a slight communication error or split-second decision by a commander could have thwarted all their efforts, as it nearly did, if not for Vasily Arkhipov's courageous choice. The Cuban Missile Crisis revealed just how fragile human politics are compared to the terrifying power they can unleash.
Good video.
Good video. So Sonny says was arguing with someone last night who said we shouldn't help Ukraine and was essentially pro-Russia.
Yeah, I mean, there's people like that, I feel like, and especially like someone like Chomsky, honestly, who is so anti-America and is so anti-military industrial complex, which how can you not be anti-military industrial complex? But if we're going to be spending that much money on war, I mean, the United States is going to do that anyways. We are a war machine, so like, in terms of if it's inevitably going to happen, like, this is a good cause, I think, to
It's as good as there's been in recent history.
and to prevent, obviously, like, to prevent World War III is the biggest thing, and I think it's pretty obvious from what we're reading that helping Ukraine is helping to prevent nuclear war, so I think it's pretty ridiculous for anybody to say that we shouldn't be helping Ukraine in at least some capacity.
So he said he wasn't anti-military, he's pro-military/police, but he just didn't want to spend taxpayer dollars.
I mean,
All right, this guy just sounds like a clown.
does he not know what the military budget is? And I think what did we send? We probably sent like 100 million. Let's see. Can you type in how much money has been sent to Ukraine?
Yeah. I still hate this keyboard.
113 billion. Like, that's not even that, like, compare
Yeah.
and look up the U.S. military budget.
I mean, we know how much it is.
800 million 800
800
billion, rather.
U.S. Military
A year.
budget that's 2020. That's 2020. It's probably 2023.
20. 816, and that's a year. So
A year, yeah.
So, well, and that's like defending our own interests, but like they were talking about, it's a proxy war between NATO and the powers that are going to be fighting in World War III. So, and again, this is escalating, and obviously do not support war, but in the state of affairs we are living in the United States, like it is a reality, and in terms of just like the reality of things, I think it's a decent place to be putting the military budget if we have to be spending it somewhere.
Sure.
I mean, and again, I probably can develop my thoughts more on this, but that's where I'm at right now. And let's take a look at this Nord Stream pipeline video before we go back into the article and just finish up the Russia section.
Let me just.
These bubbles in the Baltic Sea flared up after explosions on the Nord Stream gas pipelines in September 2022. The incident prompted several international investigations. Western officials initially accused Russia of sabotage, but Moscow denied this. Now, more details of the probes are starting to emerge.
The German prosecutor announced that they had searched a rental yacht that was possibly linked to the attack on the pipelines.
They also said a pro-Ukrainian group may have been responsible, but Ukrainian officials denied any involvement. So here's what we know so far about the explosions that hit some of Europe's most important pipelines. The Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 pipelines were built to transfer gas from Russia to Europe. But Russian gas giant Gazprom stopped deliveries through Nord Stream in August 2022, saying the pipes needed repairs. Nord Stream 2 was built but wasn't up and running yet because Germany stopped its certification just before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Then, in September 2022, the pipelines were damaged in explosions. Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, the three countries closest to the incident, launched separate investigations into the cause. Early findings said the blasts were deliberate and caused leaks in 4 places. And the investigations looked at the possibility of Russia as the instigator. Moscow has repeatedly denied any involvement. In early March, German prosecutors said that 2 months earlier, investigators searched a yacht and found traces of explosives on board.
It's like James Bond here. Like this is.
I've been reading it like, huh?
It's a very beautiful white.
Yeah, they were looking on a yacht.
All right.
So like whoever was like literally doing this mission, like whether it was Russia or whoever, the U.S., like they must have been like, this is crazy.
That's been a while.
Boat that has 5 cabins and can comfortably sleep 11 people.
Investigators believe the vessel set sail from a port in northern Germany on September 6.
Around September the 7th, it made a pit stop in Wiek on the island of Rügen, also in northern Germany. There, I think part of the crew came on board and they loaded the boat with food and other provisions. And then from then, there's a bit of a gap, and then the boat re-emerges on the 16th of September on the Danish island of Christiansø, which is close to the area where the Nord Stream pipelines were attacked.
German officials said a group of people rented the boat. Some of them presented Ukrainian passports that may have been forged.
Und wir müssen ja deutlich unterscheiden, ob es eine ukrainische Gruppe war, also im ukrainischen Auftrag gewesen sein könnte, oder eine pro-ukrainische, ohne Wissen der Regierung.
What we don't know, however, is who these people were, what is exactly their relationship to Ukraine, if they were Ukrainians, and whether or not they had any relationship to the Ukrainian government or any kind of formal authority.
Ukrainian officials denied any involvement.
That's totally against our own interest.
Russia's president had accused what he called Anglo-Saxon powers of blowing up the pipelines. And the Kremlin said Western nations rejected its request to join their investigations.
One thing that we know for a fact that these investigators do not believe anymore that Russia was behind this.
German investigators are also looking at whether the boat was part of a larger mission or a false flag operation designed to divert attention from the real culprits.
We'll see where this leads, but at the present time, it doesn't seem we have more clarity. It seems we have even more layers of obscurity and mystery adding to this kind of huge puzzle.
The leaks highlighted concerns about the safety of critical.
That is interesting.
I should make a movie about that. I'd watch it. Jeez, that was crazy.
Have you heard about that?
No, I did, but I didn't know it was like that intricate.
Yeah. Who do you think did it just based off that? It had to be like the U.S., right?
I don't know.
Or like somebody.
I don't know. It seemed very cloak and dagger, so I don't know. I mean, who's to say?
All right, want to get back into the article?
Yeah.
Let's. All right, so that was the Russia section, I suppose. So let's get into the Israeli-Iran kind of dynamic here.
Yeah. All right. In January of 2023, the UN explained Iran has enough enriched uranium to make several nuclear weapons. The international community has been keeping a close eye on Iran's uranium enrichment activities for decades because of concerns over the potential for a country to develop a nuclear arsenal that could spark World War III. Uranium is a key ingredient in nuclear weapons, and if Iran can enrich enough of it to weapons-grade levels, they could theoretically build a nuclear bomb. This prospect has alarmed many countries who worry about the destabilizing effects a nuclear-armed Iran could have on regional security. This realization of Iran's enriched uranium levels likely led to another significant event in early 2023. Also in January 2023, a drone strike hit an advanced weapons production facility in Isfahan, Iran. The Wall Street Journal reported Israel's intelligence agency Mossad was responsible for the attack that targeted an Iranian Ministry of Defense site with precision strikes. Iran's defense ministry said 3 drones were involved in an attack on a military factory, but contradicted press reports by claiming no damage was done. This attack appears to be just one more example in the long-running conflict between Israel and Iran, with Israel using covert actions to target Iran's nuclear program and its conventional weapons capabilities, and Iran arming militias along Israel's border. One overreaction in this long simmer back and forth could spark World War III.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Middle Eastern politics are some of the most complex webs of geopolitical analysis that you can find. Specifically, the Israeli-Palestine conflict is incredibly complex, and I remember, I think it had to have been summer or May 2021 where there was the last big flare-up. That was when I really started first learning about it. And again, like, I don't know that much about it, and I definitely would tend to be pro-Palestine, but there's so much to learn, and if you don't know that Israel is one of the biggest benefactors of U.S. military aid, and the U.S. kind of views Israel as like an outpost in the Middle East of Western influence. So in terms of where this would fall, it would definitely be Iran would be the one siding with China and Russia, and Israel would be heavily, heavily backed by the U.S.
Yeah.
So let's keep going.
The government of Iran is not a victim. The government of Iran has been at war with the U.S. since Iranian revolutionaries stormed our embassy in Tehran and held 52 American hostages for 444 days. Also, following the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the new regime in Tehran, led by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, strongly opposed the existence of Israel, which it saw as a Western-backed, illegitimate state occupying Muslim land. Subsequent regimes continued and exacerbated this stance. For example, in 2018, the current Iranian Supreme Leader, Khamenei, called Israel a cancerous tumor that needed to be removed and eradicated.
Jeez.
Those are fighting words. The Iranian government is the world's top state sponsor of terrorism and has killed hundreds of thousands of people.
All right, so that's a little like subjective, but I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily untrue, but you can tell that's a campaign statement there, you know?
Sure.
That's not very objective.
It has killed U.S. troops as well as its own people for peacefully protesting. The Iranian government even murdered a young woman, Mahsa Amini, for not wearing a headscarf. A government that has a history of killing civilians armed with nuclear weapons is a likely candidate to spark World War III. The Iranian government, not the Iranian people or Persian culture, is responsible for escalating tensions with the rest of the world. If the Iranian government wants to rejoin the international community, it must do a few simple things. Stop killing American citizens and our allies. Stop lying about its nuclear program. Stop using terrorism and coercion to prevent the people of Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Afghanistan from choosing their own future. And stop murdering its citizens for peacefully protesting.
Yeah,
I mean, none of those things should happen.
I think our guest might be here.
Really?
Yep.
All right.
Yo.
Howdy.
All right,
Ah,
here he
I
is.
got a little drenched on the way in.
Dude, I got sucked.
All right, so this is my friend Will Gilaterno, UMass graduate, finance.
Share for me.
I'll get up for you. I think I might be on my way out.
All right,
Take
so
my
we
spot.
got one co-host leaving, another one coming in.
I'll be watching from afar.
All right, so if we need your help with
Yeah.
OBS or anything, I'll.
Just let me know. Just give me a text. I'll be watching.
All right, so we're going through this article about different. Oh, did you take a look at this article?
Yeah, I did.
All right, so we're talking about the Middle East one, but do you want to introduce yourself and just tell your kind of background and anything?
Yeah, sure. Will went to UMass, worked at KKR for a year, and now I work for Enel. It's an Italian energy company doing renewables. So
Yeah. So I think we talked about it briefly on the last stream, but me and Gil have always loved talking about politics and stuff. So I think this is gonna be a great stream here because we have a lot of experience talking about this stuff, and there's a lot of this stuff that we've talked about before. So
I can't believe you didn't know who Will Hurd was.
I've never.
Actually, I can. He's not even half like a percent.
Do you respect him, or I just?
I have not really heard anything about him, but I saw the article was from him, and I was kind of shocked.
Yeah, this is a good article.
It is a good article. It's
All right, so now that Gordine's gone, I'm going to have to take over the reading here, unfortunately. All right, so this subheading, what would World War III look like in the Middle East? If I've come back to office for one main reason, Benjamin Netanyahu said after winning a sixth term as Israel's prime minister, to do everything I can to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. Netanyahu's predecessor, Yair Lapid, or whatever, said, if the Iranian regime gets a nuclear weapon, they will use it. It needs to be made clear to Iran that if it advances its nuclear program, the world will not respond with words, but with military force. The likeliest scenario for World War III is to erupt in the Middle East begins with Iran continuing to enrich uranium to produce a nuclear weapon.
wait, stop here. Like we used to have like a watch on Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah, under the Iran nuclear
deal that Obama did,
Yes.
and Trump got out of it because he said it was like the worst deal ever. He literally got out of it just because Obama got in it.
No, let's actually pull up the Iran nuclear deal and like dig into it a little bit.
I don't know like an insane amount about it, but at least we had like tabs on what they were doing, and they
Yes.
agreed not to make like I'm pretty sure they agreed not to make nuclear weapons in the program.
Well, I can't remember if did Iran agree to having like UN like inspectors?
Yes, I'm pretty sure they did as a part of this.
So the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran Deal, is an agreement on the Iran nuclear program reached in Vienna in 2015 with the P+1, the UN Security Council.
Oh yeah.
Let's see.
Of course.
Let's this is too dense, but we got the idea. Let's go back into this. All right. The likeliest scenario to erupt in the Middle East begins with Iran continuing to enrich uranium to produce a nuclear weapon. In an effort to protect their self-interest and right to exist, Israel conducts surgical strikes on Iranian facilities involved in development of nuclear weapons, ongoing some protest against them, international pride, or Iran versus the world. Their overreaction results in significant civilian casualties in Israel, or even an attack against American interests in the region, since the Great Satan is responsible for Israel's existence. The current regime is failing to represent the will of the Iranian people. Since the end of 2022 throughout 2023, Iranian women have led their countrymen in rising up against the theocratic dictatorship. It falls on America and our allies to not cheer from afar as we did during the Iranian Green Revolution, but to proactively support their cause to prevent World War III. You got anything on that?
I don't know. What does he want us to like fund fund the women uprising movement in Iran?
Yeah,
I know. I'm like,
we can barely give. I mean, the row is dead. And they're asking us to. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously that's a little bit in jest. But.
yeah, but no. I mean, it's a good point. I can definitely see that happening. Like it's already happening. That they're clearly probably making nuclear weapons or like on track to. Like, why wouldn't do it? I would do it if I was a country. That's your own. The reason Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, like Ukraine wouldn't be in this position if they didn't give up their nuclear weapons. But there was like some treaty in like the 90s that we got Ukraine like willfully just gave up their nuclear weapons.
Probably because they want to be in NATO.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure the U.S. somehow made that deal and got them to give it up, and now like look what happens.
So something we were talking about earlier is that do we kind of think the sides on the potential World War III would be China, Russia, Iran, and like North Korea versus the West?
Yeah.
Or do you think that would be the sides? Or
yeah, India's like a wild card.
India is a wild card because
Brazil's a wild card, especially with Lula, or is that his name?
Lula, yeah.
That guy, like, he, like, rightfully so, he, like, doesn't fuck with the U.S.
We're trying not to swear, but that's all right.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. But yeah. Wait, Lula doesn't like the U.S.? I thought, well...
No, like, they're trying to make, like, their own currency, like, their own, like, trade currency with a part of BRICS.
Yeah.
They're, like, and they,
can
like,
you explain what BRICS is? Brazil, Russia, India, China...
South Africa.
Yeah, it's like an acronym for like big developing economies, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I think they have like a trade agreements and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's not like military or anything. I don't think. But yeah, I don't know. Brazil, Lula he's not going with the US, so I don't think he'd side with Russia though and China. But
yeah.
What is Brazil at that point?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I mean,
it's gonna be nuclear Armageddon though. Like that's the thing. It's like whose nuke hits first.
That's what we were saying before. Like nuclear war obviously it makes zero sense. Like if nuclear war happens, the world is over. Like what is the point? Like who's gonna rule the ashes? But this is what the part I find the most interesting, which is the Taiwan element, because if you don't know the background, basically, I forget when, I think when Mao took over in China, some of the other, basically like one of the factions in China went to the island of Taiwan and claimed they had legitimate rule and authority in China, while the communists took over the mainland and now have most of the power. But still to this day, I forget the exact term they use to describe themselves, but those sect of Chinese people founded Taiwan, and they are U.S. allies. They're a democracy, China claims complete control over Taiwan, and obviously Taiwan claims itself as an independent country. And people think that if China was to invade Taiwan, then that could really spark World War III. And I guess I didn't know how sensitive this topic was until reading that book by Josh Rogan about China, when he said after Trump won the election, he received a call from the Taiwanese president, and like China got so mad, and like ambassadors reached out, were like, you cannot take calls from this this illegitimate country, which is pretty ridiculous, which I did not like. And they do not take kindly to people supporting Taiwan.
No.
But I want to see if they talk about the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, because they have a very advanced like tech industry.
Yeah, Taiwan Semiconductor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people...
Funny story about them. Buffett, like, invested, like, he took a stake in them, and then, like, 3 months later, sold the stake. And then at the meeting, he was like, they asked, like, why'd you do that? And he was like, yeah, I just don't feel good about the geopolitical tensions. But so on Buffett, like, for him to just make an investment and then 3 months later completely switch, I don't know what he's thinking. But.
All right, I do not like this first paragraph here in terms of my personal and the stability of the world. So, in February 2023, the CIA director William Burns shared intelligence that Chinese President Xi Jinping had instructed his country's army to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. Brilliant. That's fantastic news. Yeah. He cautioned that it was not clear whether Xi had actually decided whether to use military force for unification. Taiwan is important to the U.S. for economic, strategic, and political reasons that cannot be understated. For 70 years of self-rule is in more danger today than it has been in any point in the history. The Xi regime in China seems determined to bring a decisive conclusion to a long-term strategy strategic dance with its former territory. One way or the other, the status quo will be shattered. As with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it will ultimately fall on the U.S. and the world to decide whether the autocratic regime gets to decide if its neighbors should be free. That choice is likely coming sooner rather than later, and with so much at stake economically, strategically, and most importantly, with the lives of 23 million people hanging in the balance, we would do well to be prevent World War III. Is that a typo?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. So you got anything on that?
I mean, this seems like the most likely one.
Yeah, this seems like
that's what if I'm picking one out of the three, I'm picking this one.
And I mean, obviously,
the other two are still likely. But
in terms of, we know that the invasion of Russia is actually happening, but it seems like it's a land invasion at this point, and if nothing's happened in the first year of it,
I feel like it would have happened already. And especially with the stuff that just came out in Russia, like all that's going on there.
What stuff?
Like Prigozhin and
the
almost
militant groups
falling into civil war. That's kind of I don't know.
All right, we'll keep going. They're going to talk about the South China Sea, which is a extremely strategic area in China, and I have a thought on this after, which they might talk about, but we'll see. China will invade Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party is not going to give up on its claim of Taiwan without a fight. The island has been part of Chinese territory for centuries, and the Chinese government has made it clear that it will use military force if necessary to reunify Taiwan with the mainland. An invasion of Taiwan impacts Japan, South Korea, and Australia, with the majority of Asian countries in the Pacific, To prevent an invasion of Taiwan, the Taiwanese must get to a point where it is so clear they can win a fight with China. They can win a fight that China decides against using violence to get away. The United States can prevent World War III from coming to the South China Sea, but we can't make the same mistakes with Taiwan that we made with Ukraine by not helping prepare for a war. Do you want to say what the thing about the U.S. investing in Australia and those countries with their nuclear?
Oh yeah, the nuclear submarine. So it's not like a submarine with a nuke. It's nuclear powered submarines.
Yeah.
Which some people are freaking out.
Yeah.
But it's just a deal between Britain, the U.S., and Australia. We're just giving them our tech basically.
Yeah.
And they're paying a good chunk of money, $200 billion plus for submarines.
I'm sure Raytheon's loving that one.
Yeah, it's a great deal for the industrial complex, but it's to protect that area.
Yeah.
And it's a clear the French were so pissed off about the deal too, because they had a deal with the French, but their tech's not as good, and we just kind of did a deal behind their back with the Aussies.
Yeah. I'm gonna make sure we're watching the chat. Gurney says, how will China-Taiwan situation affect LeBron's legacy? Oh man, that's a big question here. But let's finish this little section here. The United States and our allies need to continue helping Taiwan's defense forces and close the performance gap between them and the People's Liberation Army, which is China's what they call China's army. It's also time for the American leaders to transition from a position of strategic ambiguity to a firm, clear declaration that we will support Taiwan in their forceful resistance to an invasion. We are already entangled with Taiwan, and to act any other way would be against our interests. And something we were just discussing was this Taiwan semiconductors, which is, just to reiterate, a very advanced form of technology that's used in a lot of tech. And people say that one of the main reasons why we need to protect Taiwan so much is because if China was able to take over this tech that they are not advanced on, Taiwan has this tech that China doesn't have yet, and the U.S. is a leader in this tech because of Taiwan, that would be disastrous. And they were saying that if China was to invade, Taiwan would just blow up their own factories, so China couldn't get access to it. Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff's in everything, and it's especially important for artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And so the military's clearly using that stuff for.
I mean, if we're using AI on stream, I'm sure the military is using
Yes, and that tech like made by like Nvidia. That's why like Nvidia's stock's going crazy because they have like AI.
Well, and that's why I'm so surprised that a lot of people I talk to on the Cape in the environmental field like aren't using this AI. Like a lot of smart people I'm showing this aren't using it. But then I got to remember like the government in Harvard and like all these places are using it in a far more advanced way than we are. But I just think people haven't really become privy to it yet. In terms of, I guess, how you can use it in this industry, which you wouldn't really think you would, like, the environmental education in field, like, I don't think that many people have thought about how to use AI for that, but that's just a little self-promotion there. But, okay.
Even, like, the Wall Street Journal did this, like, investigation on lead, cables.
Yeah.
Like cables and wiring, like for internet and things like that.
Yep.
That AT&T and Verizon knew about had lead in them, so they're like poisoning the area around it. It's kind of fucked up. But they used AI to pinpoint. Sorry. They used AI to pinpoint where all the cables were to find the ones with lead in them.
Yeah.
And they found so many cables with lead in them.
Interesting. That's crazy.
That are like in the water or like next to a playground, like random places.
All right, so we're gonna finish up this article. It looks like they're kind of bringing everything together, and then I was thinking we could watch some of this.
Ooh, what will World War 3 look like? Boom. I mean, like, yeah, that's literally it.
All right, let's go on here.
But it's kind of like which one hits first. Do you think like they have enough time to like?
Well, I mean, doesn't it take like 8 minutes or something for like a missile to reach like whatever it would be, like Japan or like Beijing to San Fran or whatever?
Probably.
So like as soon as they found out, they would like launch the up there. So
yeah.
This is our kind of made my own sentence there. However, current geopolitical tensions suggest a few key players. If the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine escalated into World War III, then the 29 European countries of NATO alliance, its two North American members, Canada and the United States, would be most definitely drawn to the conflict.
Probably Japan, too.
Yeah, Japan, South Korea, yeah. I mean, in India, like we were saying, is the... Let's actually...
India, World War III.
Let's see. All right.
Pakistan.
So this article is called Putin's Allies, the 6 countries likely to support Russia in World War III, including China. Pakistan. Let's see if they got India. China, we know. India has stated saying Donald Lu, the U.S. State Department Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South Asia. That is a mouthful of the title. The U.S. State Department's Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs. Okay. It's now time for India to further distance itself from Russia. Moscow is India's biggest arms supplier, and who New Delhi signed a $5.43 billion deal with the purchase Russia. I did not know they were that tied. Wow. So they're saying South Africa too. Brazil and Mexico. Both Brazil and Mexico have refused to impose sanctions on Russia and avoiding condemning the invasion. Obrador, a left-wing populist, said we are not going to take any sort of economic reprisal because we want to have good relations with all governments in the world. Fair enough. Both Hinara, so this is dated. The 66-year-old visited Putin last month and said Brazil buys much of its fertilizer from Russia and does not want its economy to be affected by taking steps.
Oh no, not the fertilizer.
So let's see what Will Hurd says to finish up here, but that's like a little...
I don't even know if this is Will Hurd. It might just be some, like... some thing they put out, but, like, it's on his website.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming he stands by whatever it said. Yeah. But it's a good article.
It is a good article. What was I going to say? Yeah, so that article was like some of like the more like less obvious players. Like we know where China, Russia, Iran, and the U.S. stand. So those are kind of some more underrated countries. But I think those countries could go either way. Like some of them, like India, could go either way because a lot of time it's tied to the West because it's the world's biggest democracy. It's got a big military, and I think they would sign with the West. A lot of English speakers there.
They're not fans of China.
They're not fans of China, and I don't know. I feel like, and we say like we think the U.S. would win in 6, so like, I think they're gonna side with the winners.
The U.S. Yeah.
Even though they do border China, which is not, but they border like the mountainous areas of
Yes.
China, so like nobody lives here. Okay. An Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities could provoke a response not just from Iran but also from other countries in the region, turning this potential conflict into World War III. Since the Obama administration, the Sunni Arab countries, led by Saudi Arabia, have been improving bilateral relations with Israel in an effort to build an alliance against Iran. And the thing about the Sunnis and the Shias in the Middle East is that the Sunnis are the more liberal sect of the Muslim and Arab world, and they include like,
I did not know that.
yeah, so that's Saudi Arabia, and then the Shias are Iran. So yeah, and the UAE is Sunni, I believe, but Iran is Shia for sure. However, the Biden administration poor relations with traditional Arab partners like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have caused the Saudis and its Gulf allies to pursue a détente with Iran. Depending on U.S. foreign policy at the time, Israel could be on its own in the Arab world, coalescing behind Iran. I doubt that, but
Yeah.
should World War III erupt in East Asia because of China's ambitions towards Taiwan, then the U.S. and our allies, Japan, South Korea, and Philippines, would potentially be involved. And North Korea, with its nuclear capabilities, violate leadership, is another potential participant on the side of China. Places that have also started World War III in the past. Little Rocket Man, that's what Trump calls... so obviously we don't like Trump, but he's the best poster of all time.
Great
He's the best poster of all time. Come on.
Show us the good tweet.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Being nice to Rocket Man hasn't worked in 25 years. Would it work now? Clinton, Bush, Obama failed. I won't. There's one where he's like calls him fat. Do you remember that one? He's like Rocket Man called me like stupid or something. I would never call him short and fat. Hold on, where is it? I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he's wasting his time trying to negotiate with a little Rocket Man. Oh, this is a classic. Oh, where'd it go? North Korea leader Kim Jong-un just stated that his nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him I have a nuclear button too, and it is much bigger and more powerful than his, and my button works. That
Great all time.
Trump is a terrible person, but he is the greatest Twitter poster of all time. And if you disagree, come debate me on it. We gotta be checking chat still. Gordian says, Gil, there's kids watching, no swearing, alright? We're trying to show this to businesses, alright?
Alright.
Okay. But it's alright. We're gonna edit it for sure. A potential trigger for World War III has always been North Korea. The rogue nation has been developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles for years. It has repeatedly threatened to use them against the United States and its allies. In 2017's tension between North Korea and the U.S. reached a boiling point. Both sides exchanged hostile rhetoric and threats. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un continues to be proactive, and continuous testing of a strategic arsenal keeps the region on the brink of a conflict that could erupt into World War III. Okay. The Great Game. India and Pakistan. Okay, we'll see what he says about this. India and Pakistan have a long-standing rivalry. It has brought the two countries close to World War III on multiple occasions. Both countries possess nuclear weapons and have fought 3 wars against each other since its partition in 1947. Don't know anything about that. In recent years, tensions have been high, particularly over the disputed region of Kashmir. In 2019, a terrorist attack in Kashmir killed 40 Indian soldiers, leading to military confrontation between the two countries. The situation was diffused. However, many worry that the future conflict could escalate into nuclear war in World War III. How will World War III happen? Whether or not conflicts in Kyiv, Tehran, and Taipei will lead to World War III, it's impossible to predict. However, what is clear is that these 3 regions are powder kegs that the world should be watching closely. As we've learned in the past, all it takes is to set one spark to set everything off. Could the effects from BRICS, which we talked about, nations to form a one world country currency, could be that spark. Prepare for all potential conflicts is not a warmongering or paranoia. It's a smart policy that will save money and many lives and prevent World War III. By the same token, foreign policy is not foreign. Solving foreign crises where they start is less expensive for the American taxpayer than waiting until the ripple of those crises arrive on our shores. Will there be a World War III? The short answer is it doesn't have to happen. While the potential conflicts always exist, so does the potential for peace. If nations worldwide can make the diplomatic solutions, prioritize mutual understanding, and uphold international law, World War III can be prevented. It is in our collective hands to ensure that the horrors of another global conflict remain confined to the pages of history. The future will be shaped by our actions today, and if we do the right thing, we can avoid such a catastrophic event. Damn. All right. Oh, no swearing. But you got anything on the end of that article?
I mean, like, I think you were saying this earlier. Like, didn't they think all world war was like over, like in the 90s?
Yeah, the end of history under Reagan.
Yeah,
they said that was something. There's this great lecture series that Gil showed me called "Power and Politics in Today's World." It's a Yale open courseware by Ian Shapiro, and it's fantastic. And I was actually watching the one the other day about China, which was very interesting. But he talks about like the Reagan administration, Thatcher regime, or the Thatcher administration government, and they were big into obviously neoliberalism, opening trade, and the idea of the end of history, where basically all of the borders and world order was cemented, and there wouldn't be that much conflict going after that. But that was incorrect.
it was a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Also, though, no one saw China coming at that time.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about in the last couple of videos, or at points, like the miracle growth of China's economy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And in that Ian Shapiro lecture, he talks about the rise of China in terms of economically, and just how they, in the last stream, we talked about how they started off with 90% of all Chinese people in poverty, and now 95% of people are out of poverty, which is, like, in terms of 30 years or something, is incredible.
Yeah.
And people underestimate, like, people see, like, oh, China, it's called the Chinese Communist Party. But really the structure of their government is becoming more capitalistic, and it's technically considered socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the communism part kind of refers to, like, a long-standing phrase used to describe their government from the Mao era and the more communist organization of their authoritarian like political structure. So it's really not like the makeup of the economy that is considered it communistic. Is communistic word? Communism
Can be.
whatever. I'm coining it. But yeah, I think
Yeah, that's a good point, because when people say like, oh, like China commies, like, you're really not.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's the second most billionaires in the world, or it might even be the first, like, in China. So it's not like, oh, they're redistributing no. There's a lot of business owners. We can we're going to be talking a lot about China on these streams going
I
forward.
wonder what
just-
the average
just 'cause
tax rate in China is.
you want to pull that up?
Yeah.
You want to pull it up? You want to plug this in the chat bot?
What?
Here, let's plug it in the chat bot. It might have a better answer. Let's.
Oh. ChatGPT chatbot. What is China's average tax rate? Yeah. Something like that. I wonder if it's high. Above the US.
And we can go in.
I don't even know what the average tax rate is for the US. Probably somewhere in the mid-20s.
Gordian, if you're in here, tell me if this is correct. Okay, you want to type in what we got here?
Yeah, sure. Average. Oh, God.
All right.
He translated to...
Yeah, okay. We'll say... Yeah, do you want to read that? Or read it out loud?
Yeah, the individual income tax in China is progressive, with different tax rates based on income levels. The tax rates range from 3% to 45% for residents.
So you're the finance guy, so you might be able to speak a little more to like what this really means, but if you want.
That's a wide range, but like 45% of your income.
Just that you can see that's Gordian, but go on.
Social Security and Housing Fund. Employees and employers in China contribute to Social Security and Housing Funds, typically around 20 to 30% of an employee's income. The exact rates may vary by location. That's interesting. That's a high amount. And a value-added tax and corporate income tax. Businesses in China generally pay a 13% value-added tax on goods and services. The corporate income tax rate is usually 25%. But it can differ for specific industries. What's the corporate tax rate now? Like 20.
Not sure.
1 point. $21%. So it's not even that much higher. What do they do with that value add?
You got anything else you want to add? Let's ask it. Is China communist? Socialist system with Chinese characteristics.
Yeah.
Well, the CCP is a communist party. China's economic system has undergone significant changes, adopting elements of market-oriented reforms, capitalism, and embracing aspects of a mixed economy. In recent decades, China has experienced rapid economic growth, implemented various market-oriented policies while maintaining a one-party socialist political system, like I was saying.
Yeah.
It is important to note the degree of adherence to communist ideology and the practical implementation of policies can vary over time across different aspects of governance and society in China. And
Good answer.
Good answer.
Very good answer.
And, I mean, in terms of, like, before they were opened up to trade in 1973 with,
With the West.
With the West, yep. Like under Mao, certainly they were Chinese.
Yes.
They were communist, and I don't know if you guys have ever.
Well,
heard,
they were like all farmers.
Have you guys heard of the Great Leap Forward? Was like Mao's like plan to have rapid growth, and it caused like one of the biggest famines in history.
Yes, I did hear about that.
So this was a disaster.
There's this good series on Netflix, History 101, and there's an episode on China.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love. Let's simplify this.
Simplify.
The Great Leap Forward was an economic and social campaign led by Mao Zedong in China from 1958 to 1961 is shorter than I thought. Its goal was to quickly transform China into an industrialized nation. However, the campaign resulted in wide scale inefficiencies, economic disruptions, and agricultural failures. These problems, combined with the natural disasters and mismanagement, led to a severe famine known as the Great Chinese Famine. The campaign had significant negative consequences marked by setbacks for the country's economy. And I remember people like totally pulled the wool over Mao's eyes in like terms of how this was working. So China is obviously vast, and in this time, like communication was like not there. So like they'd be like, "Wow, we're gonna go visit this like farm and like wherever." So they would go and like they would bring him to like the best farm they had, and they would be like, "Mao, look at this, we were killing it out here." And he'd be like, "Oh yeah." But Ingredient says one day you'll spell simplify right. Probably not.
Yeah.
And again, I keep trying to say it, but I keep getting distracted. That China is one of my favorite things to study. I wrote my thesis on it, so we'll be doing a lot of China stuff. And I hope that eventually, if I do go back to grad school and maybe even get like a PhD in like foreign affairs and stuff, I'd love to do it studying China. So, and I love learning about it. But so after the Great Leap Forward, there was another like Mao initiative called the Cultural Revolution. So let's take a look what that is. Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution was a movement in China from 1966 to 1976. It aimed at promoting communist ideology and eliminated perceived enemies. Young people called the Red Guards carried out revolutionary actions that led to social upheaval and economic disruption. The movement ended with Mao's death and caused significant suffering and long-lasting effects on Chinese society. So this was like after the Great Leap Forward, and I think the Great Leap Forward did have an influence on the structure of China's economy, even though it like failed miserably and caused a famine. Like the economic makeup of the country was still at least transformed to some degree. Mm-hmm. But after this was over, they had like the cultural revolution where they silenced dissenters and promoted the culture of the communist culture that they wanted. And I think it was, people consider it successful, at least for their goals. The sex of Mao's Cultural Revolution is achieving its intended goals. The topic of debate and interpretation. The movement had significant and far-reaching consequences for Chinese society, but its outcomes were complex and multifaceted. In terms of its stated objectives, such was a reasserting communist ideology and eliminating perceived bourgeoisie and counter-revolutionary elements. The Cultural Revolution had some short-term effects. It disrupted established power structures, removed certain political figures from positions of authority, and instilled a sense of revolutionary zeal among segments of the population. However, these changes led to social unrest, violence, and widespread chaos. In the long run, the Cultural Revolution is generally regarded as having caused immense damage to Chinese social fabric, economy, and educational system. The disruptions of the purges resulted in the loss of countless lives, destruction of cultural heritage, and the disruption of economic production and governance. The radical policies and factional struggles of the time caused significant suffering amongst individuals and had negative impacts on China's overall development. Moreover, the Cultural Revolution eventually lost momentum and was brought to an end after Mao's death in 1976. The subsequent Chinese leadership, recognizing the damage caused the movement, implemented reforms, policies aimed at stabilizing the country, restoring economic growth. Overall, the Cultural Revolution, while it did have at least some impact in achieving its certain goals, its long-term consequences were detrimental and have been widely criticized. In terms of like our view of it as like modern-day American citizens, it's like they were like signing. You're not getting killed for saying like F Trump or whatever.
Yeah.
But you got anything on that?
No, I don't know a ton about Chinese history.
Yeah. I've listened, like, when I was at Home Depot, I would listen to a lot of, like, podcasts and stuff, and I was always listening to stuff on China. But before we get back into World War III, let's just take a pause, or let's just take a look at Xi Jinping's influence on the Chinese. So, I actually don't know if we'll know this yet because of the information cutoff, but explain how Xi put himself in an increased level of power in the CCP.
Wow.
Yeah, so let's read this and we'll get back into World War III. And obviously China is going to be the biggest player besides maybe Russia, so let's read this. Xi Jinping, the current general secretary, and he's probably the most powerful person in the world just because Biden doesn't have complete control of the U.S. government, and Xi controls the entire... He can do whatever he wants, honestly. Xi is the current general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, consolidated and increased his power within the party through various mechanisms and strategic moves. Here are some key factors that contributed to the increased levels of power. And Trump thinks Xi is very smart. He was just said in a recent interview, like, in terms of the structure of Chinese political system, like, people will go into the political system, and then whoever is the smartest person and most connected and most savvy person gets to the top. And in terms of the millions of smart Chinese people in the government, Xi got to the top.
It really is crazy that the amount of power that he has.
Yeah, it is insane. I mean, and Putin has a similar level of power, except for the fact his country is not as powerful and economically successful, and he blew his political capital on the invasion of Ukraine, which was in his military capital. But let's see how Xi did it here. Okay. Anti-corruption campaign. Soon after assuming office in 2012, and he actually just... Usually, the presidents have to resign at a certain
term limits,
certain age, but Xi killed that, so he is president for life, essentially.
Yeah.
Xi launched a high-profile anti-corruption campaign targeting both high-ranking officials and lower-level bureaucrats. This campaign helped Xi remove political rivals, weaken opposition within the party, and project an image of being tough on corruption. Party and military leadership positions. She assumed multiple key positions in the CCP and military, allowing to exert control and influence across various power structures. In addition to being the general secretary, he also became the chairman of the Central Military Commission, consolidating his authority over the armed forces.
Smart.
Ideological control. She emphasized the need for ideological unity within the party and promoted his own political ideology known as Xi Jinping thought Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, and elevated his status and gave prominent role in reshaping the party's policy. And this is the thing that I thought I was going to say, which he actually wrote himself into the Chinese Constitution. So there have been only a couple Chinese presidents who have been like, well, there hasn't been that many since Mao, but Mao was definitely involved in like specifically his ideas in the Constitution. But Xi put Xi Jinping thought in his like economic policies into the Constitution. So, okay, here we go. Also, we got this. Removal of term limits. In 2018, the CCP abolished term limits for the president, allowing Xi to potentially remain in power beyond the traditional two-term limit. This move signaled his intention to stay in power for an extended period, increasing his control and influence over the party and country. Purging political rivals. Xi has carried out purges in the disciplinary actions against officials perceived as disloyal or challenging his unity authority. This includes targeting influential figures within the party, such as former Popular Standing Committee member Zhao Yongkang, which further... That was decent. That was good. Was that not good?
Good job.
Which further solidified Xi's power base. Centralization of power. Xi has concentrated his power by strengthening the authority of the CCP Central Committee, reducing the influence of regional and local factions. The central power allows him to have greater control over policy decisions and personal appointments. And lastly, it is important to note that these are simplified explanations of the power dynamics within the CCP. It can be complex and influenced by various factors. and Xi's increased level of power has implications for both domestic policies and China's international relations. But that was interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, basically just all about like ideological control, purging like any dissidents or anybody who challenges you. Like it's like
Yeah.
just so there's only one thought out there and one thought only, and it's just
Yeah.
him being the leader of China.
Yeah. I mean, in the West seems to think when, like, you hear, like, Biden talk like that State of the Union when he was talking about, like, oh, we're not going to let, like, authoritarianism and China run the world. And I think the West seems to think that, like, democracy is going to win out and it's the correct way to run a government. But, like,
democracies are messy, sloppy, nothing gets done.
And look at what she's doing here. Like, what is going, like they have complete control over the population, like after Tiananmen Square, where essentially a bunch of students were massacred by the government for protesting. Like, there hasn't been a crossword since.
The videos of it are insane.
Yeah. I mean, we'll probably
when they go back on bikes.
Yeah, we'll probably get TOS, which is terms of service, so we were to show that video for sure. So
you think?
Yeah, definitely. Because there's people, like, being capped.
Literally just by a tanks.
Alright, that's not funny. We're trying to keep it a little professional. Alright, I mean, we're, again, as I'll say a billion times, we're going to be going into China a lot, because I love China, studying China. But let's talk more about China and talk about what World War III will look like. And unfortunately, you won't be able to hear the audio on this video, so you're going to have to read the subtitles.
Okay.
Alright.
Not far away. Almost all of the major governments are predicting it, with heads of the US military claiming that we're the closest we've ever been to a major global conflict. The first two world wars left their permanent mark on the world and its people forever. And 75 years since the recovery of World War II, and the average citizen lives in relative peace, comfortable and content with life as it is. But the truth is that the world is peaceful and
Gordian, just say if the audio is too loud when you get a chance.
until the day it isn't anymore. And that day may be much
Could be a little
closer than
louder.
it seems. And although
Can I turn it up? I'm talking to Gordian, like, through virtually here. If I do it like that on the here, will that do it for the stream? Did you see what I did? Maybe turn it up in YouTube if you can. Alright, let's see how this is. Oh, it's super loud for me.
already have been written in history. Now, historically, there's been a lot of close calls, because it's no secret.
That's why we need you here in person.
Right now, global tensions haven't been this high in decades.
Alright, how's that?
Of peace of the last 80 years, there have been some major causes for alarm. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world has ever come to a nuclear war, only ending after an agonizing standoff. Other Cold War conflicts like Vietnam and the Korean War threatened to spill over into a global conflict, but luckily never did. In 1983, the USSR's missile warning system had a malfunction and reported attack from the US. And was
Any of you
luckily
following
saved
this
by
with
one
reading
Russian
subtitles?
man's gut instinct, after suspecting it was a glitch and not passing up the warning to the chain of command. Billions of people around the world owe their lives to him for this, because we've
So
been
if you
inches
want
from
to stop and say
catastrophe
anything,
multiple
we'll
times
pause
in
it.
just the past century, but so far we've narrowly avoided it. Although the next time we might not be so lucky. Historical trends and pressures are pushing the world closer to a boiling point. If you take a look at the past 400 years of history, you'll notice an alarming pattern. Conflicts between great powers happen with regularity almost like clockwork. Each of these wars have their own reasons, but the political scientist Graham T. Allison theorized that all of them are unified by
We watched if you remember last video, we watched the dude from Harvard talk about Thucydides' trap, which is the, I think, 16 examples of two rising powers. And I think in 12 of them, they ended in war. So if you, that's a fantastic video.
the struggle of an emerging power with a dominant one. And he gave 16 historical examples of this happening, with 12 ending in war. In the World Wars, for example, the emerging power of Germany ran up against the hegemon of Britain, France, and the USA. Long periods of peace only came once the question is answered for good and one power is dominant. This has most recently been the USA, but before it was Britain or Rome. But what's concerning today is that we're about to see yet another example of this process in action. China has been an emerging power for decades, but with recent military
Huh? Okay, my dad's passing through.
How's it going?
military expansion, they're finally looking ready to challenge the title. With their 2049 plan to be the world hegemon, this directly threatens the US's stability. And what's even more disturbing is that the other players in the game also seem rather familiar. The web of alliances and power blocks we see today are incredibly reminiscent to the world in 1913. China, just like Germany, seems dead set on disturbing the world order. Meanwhile, the stagnating power of
well-edited
Japan
video.
watches nervously from across the sea. But when you talk about World War III,
Who's
most
it by?
people rightfully look straight
I
at
think
Russia.
infographics or something. Info map. Oh no, that was the other one.
Moon.
Without the security of the Soviet system of buffer states, Russia's mentality has been sent back 100 years. Their regime lives in constant fear of a war across its massive, continent-stretching borders. To
And I
cope
think
with
this is
the
before the
misery of its own
invasion.
Power, Putin has turned back the clock to the days of the Tsar,
Nicholas
trying to
II.
rejuvenate the national spirits of Russia by invading Ukraine. Now, there
Oh,
are many
maybe it
reasons
is.
for this. Ukraine was always a part of the Russian Empire for centuries, and over this time, relations between the two peoples varied. But fears of separatism and an independence movement led to a whole host of anti
Do you think there's anything that we should have done differently, like when Crimea happened at the beginning?
I remember when that was happening. I think we were in freshman year of high school, and I'm trying to remember. I honestly,
Because Obama basically did nothing.
I don't know honestly that much about it. Just beyond that, Russia annexed Crimea and they didn't really do anything about it. But I don't know. Do you have a thought on that?
I don't know what could have been done differently because, like, other than sanctions, hard sanctions, but, like, what do sanctions really... Like, I guess they hurt Russia for a little bit, but have they really even...
Yeah, I mean, I remember they were saying, like, Biden and everybody, after, like, the initial invasion, were saying, like, these sanctions are going to cripple Russia's economy, like, their stock market and banking system will never recover. It was like...
What's it, the ruble?
Yeah.
So that's obviously the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
And now it's back to, like, where it was.
Yeah. So, yeah. Let's keep going.
Ukrainian policies over the last few years. But under the USSR, Ukraine suffered the most. Soviet policies created a man-made famine called the Holodomor in the
So
early
these
1930s.
videos, like, pretty much across the border, all have, like, a super US tilt, so, I mean, or, like, Western tilt.
With Putin's official line being that Russia had to invade.
I mean, they're in English, so, like, that makes sense.
And this coincides with Putin's plans to shift Russian society further towards militarism. From 2021 to 2023, Russia's military budget has increased by 40%,
Wow.
and in January of 2023, Putin ordered the size of Russia's Western military to be increased to 1.5 million men. Although so far the war is going awfully, and international sanctions are severely damaging Russia's economy, with just the first week of the invasion cutting Russia's oil exports by 25%. In fact, it looks like Russia could collapse within 10 years.
Because if the Russians see this
Yeah,
as an
alright.
existential conflict,
Alright, well, we're getting Joe Rogan interviews here.
the nukes are their only option. The primary reason why everyone in the West has gotten shoulder to shoulder on this is they know that if Ukraine falls and Poland's next, there will be a direct fight, the Russians will lose, and then there will be a general nuclear exchange.
With this putting all the more pressure
Yeah,
for
alright,
Putin to take over Ukraine, because if he folds, all of his political power will come.
What he failed to mention, though, is, like, if Poland goes to war, then all of NATO
Yes.
goes to war.
Well, that's
So
why- That's why he's saying that they'll lose, but... And that's why he's not getting invaded, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I never thought Putin would invade Ukraine.
Yeah, agreed.
And I also, like, because how can you look at what the U.S. did in Iraq and say, our military is clearly worse? Like, even if you do take over the country, like, how are you going to sustain it?
And then they tried to install a new regime, and then it was completely destabilized. And that happened in Afghanistan too, obviously. Or Dad, what are you looking at? Jeez, you're distracting me. Dad, you got thoughts on China's rise? Nope. Okay. All right. Lost my train of thought, so let's keep going.
Come crashing down. And now there's other time pressures as well, with both Finland and Sweden becoming incredibly close to full NATO membership, which will put even more pressure on Russia's western...
And look at the repercussion. Now NATO's getting stronger.
Yeah.
There's more troops, like, on the border of, like, Poland and...
Like,
eastern western flank.
Such an idiotic decision by Putin to go to war. Like, it made no sense. Like, that's why I thought he was not going to do it, because it made no sense. They're losing the war. It makes no sense. I mean, somebody smarter than us can explain why he did it, or like give a better justification for why he did it. But to me, it makes no sense.
Border, completely opening up their northern flank in the case of a war.
F. Scott
Which is why
Giga Chad,
tensions have risen dramatically, and it's getting to the point that the spillover from the war in Ukraine could trigger a
Gordon, can you
larger
see the
war.
chat on
This will
stream?
also bring great changes to the front line of the Ukraine war, and either side making ground would only increase tensions. However, whilst the Ukraine war might be the most obvious source of a world war, it unfortunately isn't the only way
It doesn't look like you can.
because China and its increased aggression towards Taiwan could easily start a conflict that would soon snowball into a world
That's
war.
right.
You see, China's government has
Oh, you
always
can?
been marked
Okay.
by powerful resentment ever since they lost Taiwan in the Civil War. Their bitter ideological enemies, the nationalists of Taiwan, took the island and have always been a thorn in China's side since. But it goes beyond finishing an old grudge. Taiwan is a greater part of China's plan for global and economic dominance. And so it's important that we talk about China's 2049 plan. Now, the 2049 plan is the term used for China's geopolitical grand strategy. For Mao, who designed it, this meant industrializing and modernizing China's economy and institutions regardless of the cost. But after decades of meteoric growth, China has now moved on to phase 2, expanding its sphere of influence. And this shift came during the
Belt and Road
mid-2010s,
Initiative.
when China began a slew of new measures to use their new power. First, they made predatory investments into developing countries in Asia and Africa.
Okay.
Through these
Calling them predatory is somewhat disingenuous, because they are benefiting the countries for sure. I mean, there's a reason why these countries are doing them, because they're investing heavily in infrastructure. They are. I mean, if you're going to call these predatory, then you got to call the IMF and the WTO infrastructure investments predatory too. But I mean, there are definitely people who argue that these are better deals for these countries than the WTO and the IMF offer, and that's the West. And I mean, and there's a reason why, like, the people running these governments in Africa and South America are not idiots. They know what's good for their country, and I'm sure there's much economic analysis and political debate. I mean, and obviously corruption can come into that at some point, but I'm sure it has been well thought out by these countries that, okay, we're going to take this deal in the Belt and Road Initiative, and there's a reason why it's so popular. But, you got something on that?
No, that's a very good point. I mean, these countries aren't stupid. They know what they're doing, but a lot of times doesn't China end up like taking it over or
Yeah, I mean, this guy called it predatory, but he like said it so like he was so glib in saying it. But like, and again, these videos have definitely a U.S. tilt, but I think to just outright call it predatory without explaining the nuances is disingenuous. But you're right that ultimately a lot of these countries can't pay him back, and it's taken over by China. So I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted that rant and argue myself in a circle. But, I think he didn't explain the nuance, and maybe he does right here, and I was too quick.
Their new power. First, they made predatory investments into developing countries in Asia and Africa. Through these deals, China's engaged in a new type of modern economic colonialism, sucking resources out of these countries to fuel their own economy. And by using this new economic strength, China has then ramped up their military spending, which is why from 2018, China has increased their military budget by over 28%. And in China, this money buys much more than that in the West.
Look at she riding like JFK out there.
In comparison, the US's defense budget has actually decreased by 4% in the same
I want to see that video of she riding in his car again. Look like a boss.
And in China, this money buys much
look at this guy.
In comparison, the US's defense budget has actually decreased by 4% in the same time span, when adjusting for inflation. And you see, this is all for a reason. This military spending directly corresponds with their preparation for a coming war with the US, likely beginning with an invasion of Taiwan, with almost all geopolitical strategists understanding that the South China Sea will be the catalyst for World War III. And that's why China's put loads of focus on their naval warfare. I mean, recently China surpassed the US in having the largest navy, and whilst the quality of these ships may not be up to par, quantity has a quality of its own, and one of their new projects has been the construction of artificial military islands in the disputed South China Sea.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I want to pull up something cool that we can watch next. Do you have a timetable when you gotta leave?
No.
All right, yeah, let's make this a long one, because I really love this topic.
bases, warehouses, ports, and military installations, China will be able to choke a trade route that sees $5 trillion in goods every year. They've also increased their offensive range, giving them ability to threaten American allies like the Philippines and Japan. All of this, amongst many things, has completely destroyed relations between China and the US, who are now engaged in an escalating trade war. But today,
Oh yeah,
we're
that's
focused on
China's
Taiwan
fault.
because China has openly been aggressive to Taiwan, completely surrounding the country with jets and preparing to storm the presidential building, with the Chinese government promising to invade and annex the island as part of their One China policy. So in response, the US has tried to keep China uncertain on whether they would actually go to war over Taiwan. But recently, Biden announced that the US would step in directly in the event of an invasion. And so if China stays true to their 2049 plan, the Bible of the Communist
Like, I don't want to go to Taiwan.
Yes.
Like, and defend it. Like, no.
I mean, I do like Taiwan just because they're like, it's like, you don't get canceled if you support Taiwan. Like, people get mad at me for like liking China so much, but like, Taiwan is like, you can like Taiwan without people being like, why are you liking China? But in terms of like going to war, like, I don't want to go to war with anybody. I want to chill. I want to be able to go and like live my life. I don't want to have to worry about like nuclear war. And like, we're joking about this and laughing about this, but like, this is like could affect everybody here is watching lives. Like, if people in the thumbnail of this video is how reckless world leaders could plunge us into World War III. And like, as much as we're joking about this, like, this could literally change all of our lives. And it's something like COVID, where like none of us thought that like anything could happen like this. Like, I think this is along similar lines. And I think climate change is similar too. Like, these are things that are going to really drastically impact the global world order potentially. And like, we might not be able to do stuff like this and go out to the beach or just go out and chill when there's war in Taiwan. So let's continue on that positive note.
Party, then a wider conflict with NATO is almost inevitable. Although if you asked someone 10 years ago how World War III would start, you might think North Korea would be sure to come up in the conversation. However, nowadays, the Korean Peninsula's potential to erupt has been overlooked by the media and public, in favor of focusing on Russia and China themselves. But nothing has actually changed since then to make North Korea any less of a threat. In fact, their potential to start a third World War has only grown over the past decade. Kim Jong-un's regime is the most totalitarian government on the planet. Everyone knows this. State controls everything from the military to the media, even down to what haircut people can have. And this authoritarian control is sustained by relentless propaganda, thought control,
Chat, let's get some activity here.
Prison camps. In North Korea's twisted system, you can be incarcerated for life in a modern gulag for crimes that your grandparents committed. And these pressures have forced a nationalistic, aggressive doctrine into the populace, making them comfortable with the idea of war against the West. But what's more concerning about North Korea is their nuclear program. Ever since North Korea developed nuclear capabilities in 2006, they've been using them as a part of their saber-rattling arsenal. But what have so far been idle threats could soon turn into action if the North Korean regime ever feels legitimately threatened. I mean, what's to stop Kim Jong-un pushing the button if any other country tries to free their people, especially if China uses North Korea as a puppet in the case of invading Taiwan? Which is why North Korea has massively increased their missile tests to demonstrate this threat, launching nearly 90 missiles in 2022 alone, some of which are even capable.
And you never hear about that, like you just said. Like, when was the last time you heard about, like, remember we would get the alerts like every time North Korea launched a missile, and now they say they just like 90 missiles?
Yeah.
Like, you never
didn't hear about it at all.
Reaching the mainland United States. It's these capabilities for mass destruction, and the fact that North Korea is a complete puppet of China, which makes North Korea one of the most likely future sources for a global conflict. Whether it's in 10 days or 10 years, when World War III really does happen, it will set the course of history for the next century. But this is the most important question. Who's going to be on each side?
Okay, let's see what they say here.
We've already seen how New Age conflict can affect everyone, not just those in battle. The invasion of Ukraine sent prices of essential goods and energy skyrocketing, and erased trillions of dollars from investment accounts, with losses comparable to the 2008 financial crash. So we're all left wondering, I'm diversified, why is my portfolio still getting wiped out? We're not diversified.
S&P's up like 15% this year.
Well, you don't need to hear me go into...
yeah. What are you up, like 300%?
Alright, go on.
In the right way. See, Goldman Sachs released a shocking report saying the classic stock bond strategy won't be enough to keep investors afloat, having lost around 25% last year.
Wait,
so
what did you just say?
Not diversified in the right way. See, Goldman Sachs released a shocking report.
Goldman Sachs released a shocking report saying the classic stock bond strategy won't be enough to keep investors afloat.
Can you explain float to the chat for about a minute?
Float in, like, as an insurance
float?
float?
Yeah, do you know about that?
I'd rather have ChatGPT do it.
All right, let's do it. Actually, no, we're not doing that.
I don't know. There you want to do that?
It's surprising, but Goldman says fine art
That would be so. Yeah, let's talk about insurance. We need.
Reinsurance, get a lab on
Yeah,
there.
get a lab on it. All right, yeah, that was. All right, let's go.
Yeah, save it for a
That's great, but how can I benefit? With Masterworks, whose 11 X's have each returned a profit to their investors. See, Masterworks' platform lets you invest in contemporary art from legends like
Oh, this is
Wait,
what I
is
use.
this an ad?
Yeah.
I think this is an ad.
Yeah, this is what I use to invest in my painting.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah. You told me about that.
Of course, a lot would depend on how the war
Green says
starts.
no
In a
insurance,
scenario
not about to
where
go.
Russian aggression towards the West triggers a war, their survival would hinge on getting two key allies involved,
Alright,
Iran
India.
and China. You see,
Oh.
Iran has enjoyed the same shoddy reputation in the West as Russia, as they're obviously no friend of the US. I mean, the whole government came into being after overthrowing the pro-US regime, and ever since the two countries have been at each other's throats. Getting into the complex and bloody story would be way too much for this video, but it's safe to say they're no friends of the US at all, and would happily ally with Russia or China if they thought they stood a chance, as recently they've upgraded their cooperation, with Russia exchanging military technology for attack drones to be used in Ukraine. However, Iran's cooperation with China is a little more uncertain. After Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia, China seems to be taking their side in the Middle East
BS.
conflict. But when push comes to shove, Iran's vendetta against the West runs much deeper than the spat with China. But Russia also has other allies, although they're not even close to being superpowers.
I just want to look up another video that we're gonna watch also next. I don't even know if it exists, but I'm sure it does.
BBC News. Vice.
Yeah, we'll watch. We'll. Yeah, I just want to pull that up. We can decide which one.
I mean, Belarus, for example, has assisted Russia in their invasion of Ukraine, letting Russian troops use their borders to attack. Russia has also friends in Central Asia, countries that fall within the old Soviet sphere of influence. However, China is the main prize, and would be trickier for Russia to convince in the event of a war. Or at least it seems that
Mongolia.
way, because the two nations seem perfectly suited for a circumstantial alliance, but they don't have any formal military pacts yet. And this is because it isn't in China's interest to show their hand. A war between Russia and the US would destabilize their delicate trading balance, forcing them to give up one trading partner or the other. The US stands a much better chance of damaging China's maritime trade, which is a major deterrent to Chinese aggression or alliance with Russia. But China's Belt and Road Initiative has been eroding this weakness, because for the last couple of decades, China's been doing everything they can to destabilize the US's reigning power over the world. And that's why more of China's imports arrive by train now rather than boat.
Well, that's because I like making content like we're making. Well, like this guy has such an agenda, and like I think we're both open to like learning more. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. And like our views we're stating right now are our current level of understanding. We obviously have biases, but like we're open to this guy's like trying to like sell you something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
What will World War III look like?
Yeah.
My hidden agenda.
yeah.
And while China deals with their economic vulnerabilities and develops their military, they're getting more and more likely to join Russia in an all-out war.
China from the beginning has said that it will back up Russia. It will be Russia's ally because it wants to be a counterweight to American power in the world.
For all its song and dance about its neutrality on the world stage, China has made its choice, siding with Russia against Ukraine.
China would be happy to seize any chance they're given to upset the status quo.
Oh, look at Xi in his military car.
North Korea. The isolationist dictatorship is effectively a Chinese vassal, and they've already given their full support to China's claims in Taiwan.
Ooh, Xi
In fact, the whole of
drinking
North Korea
wine.
is sustained
Oh,
by
we need
China.
to. It's gonna be fun. I mean, I'm outing myself as like a Xi lover here. Have you seen this video?
No. Oh yeah.
With the paparazzi flashing, dude. She's like, am I doing it right? Like, why are there so many camera flashes? Like, how many shots do they need? Alright, that's enough of that. Alright.
itself. The whole regime would collapse if it wasn't for China. And time is also buying China more and more allies as the years
Alright,
go
how many
by.
videos of Xi riding in his car will we get?
Ties them to a free trade deal with pretty much the rest of the Pacific trading nations. And as this develops, the question of who is to side with who will get harder for many nations that aren't firm friends of the US to begin with. But the ultimate nightmare scenario for the West is a China-Russia-Iran coalition, but an active military relationship is doubtful. History does tell us that an economic and political alliance is much more likely than a military one. For example, during World War II, collaboration between Japan and Germany was
They blur out the swastika.
incredibly limited, despite grand proclamations at diplomatic summits. Mexico will also play an incredibly undervalued role in a future conflict. So far, they've taken a neutral stance on the war in Ukraine, and have actually enjoyed good relations with Russia, being one of the only countries to adopt the Sputnik vaccine. And their alliance with the US isn't a foregone conclusion. Even though the US is Mexico's biggest trading partner, it's very likely that Russia will exploit Mexican neutrality or their ties with drug cartels to disrupt the US, rather than opening up a Northern American front. As for the West, they can count on lots of different alliances around the world. Every member of NATO would be expected to fight. An attack on one member is an attack on all members after all. And this means that the Russia would have to contend with the US, the UK, most of the European Union, including France and Germany, and crucially Turkey. And you see, Turkey's had the best relations with Russia, but NATO would force their hand in the event of a clear Russian aggression. The US's other allies would also likely get involved, like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. And in a war against China, the US could expect the same allies as against Russia with a few key differences. Obviously, Japan and Australia would play a much larger role in the conflict, acting as the US's two bastions in the Pacific. Military cooperation has increased in recent years, with the announcement of the AUK-US Pact, which is the US, the UK, and Australia promising to work on increasing their military presence in the Pacific, with the crowning jewel of the treaty being a fleet of nuclear subs for deployment off of Australia's coast. As for other allies, the Philippines wouldn't be tempted to sell out to the US after decades of friendship. India will also play a pivotal role, as relations between India and China have been rocky to say the least, with there being lots of border skirmishes as the two growing powers rub against one another, with India being very wary of China's close relations to Pakistan, India's biggest enemy, and recent trade imbalances only serve to poison the relationship even further. And so through this Pacific alliance, the US hopes to choke out China's trade and ability to project maritime power. Whether this will work is a whole other story. So if World War III breaks out, what are the weapons that are going to be used? Well, the sooner the war happens, the more the weapons will resemble what we see today, particularly in the war in Ukraine. You see, one of the most obvious things that we can learn from Ukraine is the prevalence and importance of missiles. Using them, Russia has kept up an almost non-stop bombardment of key Ukrainian infrastructure. In a future war, we'll see massive advances in missile technology, and likewise in missile defense. Anti-tank missile launchers are also seeing lots of use in Ukraine, exposing a massive
If they talk
amount of
about the
tanks to
Iron
infantry
Dome.
ambushes, with analysis estimating that Russia has lost over 1,400 tanks, many as a result of Western anti-tank personnel weapons, like the Javelin or the NLAW. Future missiles are also likely to employ much more advanced guidance technology, such as AI, because even today, South Korea is fitting their attack helicopters with AI-guided air-to-surface missiles. Drones are also a very common sight in Ukraine, with the obvious strengths being that they're very hard to detect and even harder to shoot down, which is very effective for Ukraine to drop grenades.
Like, war is so crazy, like, it's so advanced.
They will be able to carry
Like,
heavier payloads.
they're investing
Meaning
so
we're only
much
just
in it,
seeing
and
the
some of the
beginning of
smartest
drone
people in the
warfare.
world
The
are
first attempts to
doing
weaponize
it.
airplanes saw pilots dropping objects like grappling hooks out of their
Like the
cockpits.
killing
This then
machines.
developed into mountain guns and actual bombs, so drones may follow the same pattern of development. But overall, the related idea of autonomous killer robots is taboo. But if the war gets desperate, then advances in this field may be inevitable.
You think like the guy who makes that stuff like every day, like, do you think he even thinks about it?
I don't. I mean, that's like the Oppenheimer question. Like,
Yeah.
Oppenheimer, I mean, and obviously we got the Christopher Nolan movie coming out soon,
Yeah.
which is going to be crazy, but I don't think he does. I think whoever it is just realizes it's their job, and
If someone's gonna do it.
they're probably committed to the science. Like, I'm sure that person is a scientist,
Yeah.
and they're just trying to advance the science, and I think that's probably their justification, but that's just, who knows? I mean, that's just what my gut says.
I mean, Russia's already been testing their own AI-driven robotic tanks. The URAN-9 is a fully autonomous ground vehicle equipped with a 30mm autocannon, among many other weapons. But if the war happens further in the future, we're likely to see weapons that only existed before in sci-fi. The US has already begun fitting their ships with laser beam weapons, although these aren't very powerful yet. The XN-1 LAWS has only really been tested against enemy drones rather than ships. However, laser weapons do have a key advantage over conventional arms, as they won't cost nearly as much per shot, and as the power levels of these lasers increase, they will soon be able to shoot down incoming missiles as well. And whilst the US is focused on lasers, China is building their own railway.
No way that is real! No way that is real!
Payload at up to 7 times the speed of sound, and this gives them a much longer range than conventional artillery, ranges that are only reachable by missiles today. But a railgun shot is much less expensive, considering the lack of explosives. And so with both of these options, the battlefield will change irreversibly. Both of these advancements are the same as larger and stronger swords were 5 years ago. Robotic warfare promises the same drastic changes to the nature of war as gunpowder did, because combat robots are incredibly attractive to militaries, as they drastically reduce casualties, making their use in battle almost risk-free. The only loss would be financial and possibly technological, if the enemy managed to recover the drone. Robot soldiers also don't have moral issues. These drones are purely logical, and will always perfectly follow orders. Now obviously there will be major ethical problems, but regimes around the world have never really had much trouble with this. They don't care that they're autonomous killing machines, all they care about is winning the war. At first, these robot soldiers would be a gradual introduction, with only the most dangerous and suited jobs getting outsourced. I mean, the US is currently working on an automated sentry turret that would take over the role of the rear guard in retreat, and over time, if it's economically viable, armed forces around the world will soon replace their human fighting machines with real ones. In fact, this has already started. The first recorded kill of a person by an autonomous drone happened in 2020, and by looking at the development of Boston Dynamics and the future progression of robot soldiers, this doesn't seem too far-fetched, and if this becomes adapted in a World War III scenario, this will then bring about a whole new wave of countermeasures, because as this develops, we're likely to see in-combat demonstrations of hacking and sabotage. Defense systems will be shut down, GPS could be interfered with, enemy robotics could even be reprogrammed and made to see their allies. But technological warfare also offers things that have only been provided so far by carpet bombing or outright occupation so far in history. Medical and power infrastructure could be severely disrupted by cyber attacks, which could bring a centralized country's war effort to a standstill for days or even weeks at a time. And as the infrastructure becomes even more centralized, this problem will only get worse. For example, Elon Musk's Starlink may sound like a good idea in peacetime, but relying on this in war would leave countries a few destroyed satellites away from chaos. I mean, rogue actors are already using this to shut down hospitals or leak intelligence, and so it's only a matter of time before we see desperate or unethical governments adopt these methods. And we're only talking about the conventional methods of disrupting a country's ability to fight. I mean, even in peacetime, China and Russia have used social media to manipulate the people of foreign countries. They could even stop a war before it starts by pushing anti-war sentiments and hit pieces on Facebook or TikTok, with state-owned platforms like TikTok having the very real potential to push propaganda and unrest around a country. This is a new type of warfare that the world hasn't seen, and once countries master this new type of social media warfare, they can then make entire populaces much more willing to fight, while sapping the strength of the enemy's army. I mean, Russia and China have been practicing and building up their capabilities for years on this front, and it seems like the West has a lot of catching up to do. But even all these present and future technologies ignore the elephant in the room: nuclear weapons. If World War III becomes a total war, there's no saying how long it would take before nuclear weapons are used. Mutually assured destruction has kept countries from pushing the big red button for years, but all of this goes out of the window during wartime. If Xi, Putin or Kim Jong-un saw their regime crumbling around them, it's a big leap of faith to believe that they wouldn't turn to their nuclear arsenals. But even with this threat, it's not hard to see a war still breaking out. It will just look a lot different to those previous world wars, with World War III potentially seeing much more limited front lines and much more emphasis placed on infrastructure disruption and economic pressure. Both Russia and China's war goals encourage this model. Both seem set on the occupation of specific countries rather than some grand plan for world dominance. Putin's Russia may not want to stop at Ukraine, but with the current pace things are going, any dreams of reuniting the Russian Empire won't come to fruition anytime soon, and any greater European war would look much more like an expanded war in Ukraine, with Russia defending attacks from both Finland and other parts of Eastern Europe. Likewise, it seems like China is set on taking Taiwan, but there isn't much reason to go beyond the one China policy, although what can be accomplished through occupation is much easier to gain through trade dominance and economic pressure. They would invade Taiwan, which would also have the effect of crippling the US's source of microchips, with things like microchips being the hidden war between the US and China right now. From Taiwan and their artificial islands, China would be able to suffocate trade in the Pacific, and so a war would likely revolve around who can control the shipping lanes, with the US pulling in Japan, Australia and other allies, with the ground war likely being limited to Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula. If China could establish regional dominance,
the Philippines just like added like 3 more US bases onto the
Really? I've heard that.
onto the country in like the past like year. So like we're expanding our presence there.
I'm shocked.
They would be able to get all
Alright,
the
let's finish
resources
this.
they need without outright invading Southeast Asia. And even though the Chinese Navy did surpass the US Navy in size in 2020, the US still possesses a dwindling technological advantage, adding in both side allies, and it looks like China isn't really ready for a war just yet. And unless America has other problems to worry about, a large-scale war in the Pacific would end very badly for the CCP, and could undo decades of work increasing their soft power over Asia. Russia, on the other hand, poses a much more direct threat. The EU would struggle to hold out against an overwhelming offensive, but Russia would have to make quick and stable gains before the EU's
dude.
economic superiority kicked
An overwhelming ground defensive? Jeez, what are we talking about
the
here?
US gets involved. And this means that the real danger period for the West will come in the next few years. And if the Chinese military can develop enough before Russia loses their edge, the US and the West could easily lose a war on two fronts. And so with all of this in mind, it should be clear that a future world war would threaten our very
Nice,
existence.
that's great,
And the
yeah.
people who ordered the
Kremlin getting
invasions
blown
most
up, just
likely will
what I
never
wanted to say.
experience the horrors that they will inflict. And like every war, it's the people who will lose their friends, their families, and their lives, regardless of the country that wins.
So that was the stream for today. If you missed it, we talked about World War. We talked about potential for World War III. We talked a lot about China. We talked about the military a lot today. So I thought it was a good stream. We didn't really talk that much about climate. And it was Gil's first appearance on the stream, and I hope there's many more. You provided some great insight. And yeah, we're going to brainstorm about maybe what you'll talk about next time you come on. But yeah, I thought it was a great stream. So yeah, we'll see you maybe sometime this week, and if not, maybe next Sunday, because I don't have a lot of time right now just with my program ending. But hopefully we can brainstorm on what we want to do for our next stream and keep updated on our other social media that we can kind of produce some content on in the meantime. But maybe look for a new YouTube video of this stream chopped up into the best parts. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys.